cold. I'm from Queensland. Just thought I'd make that clear. I want to thank you guys for coming. I also want to congratulate you, because a lot of people just won't come to these things and learn and educate themselves in what's important in going forward. And we have to start taking responsibility for our health. And if we don't start taking responsibility for our health, I can tell you now the government's not going to help you. So, you know, what Max said is that we have to make a move to educate ourselves. And that's what I do, is I educate myself and then educate others. You know, somebody said to me, "Oh, Cyndi, do you want to change the world?" And I went, "No. What right do I think that I can change the planet or the world? But I do know I can change myself. I have every ability to change myself. And then by example, I may be able to influence my family and friends. I can't change them, can't change my husband. I can see a lot. I may be able to influence my family and friends, and with their love and support, I may be able to influence a country as well as the nation and the world. So it starts with you. That's where it starts. We're not doing very well? All right. Let me tell you that I do have a conflict of interest. It is my academy, the Nutrition Academy. It's been going for nearly 10 years, and I educate people on health and nutrition. And my aim is to get hundreds of thousands of people out there in their community making change in their community. That's the aim of the Nutrition Academy. I have the principles of the Nutrition Academy are based on two things, and we're going to be talking about them. And one is Vitalism, and the other one is anthropological principles. And it was good that one of the pillars is ancient or ancestral health, because I learnt this so long ago. I had a lady say to me, you know, some things happen to you for a reason, and it's like to steer you in another direction. And I was living in Bendigo, because that's my hometown, born in Wang, so I am from this area. So I was living in Bendigo. I was 19 years of age. I was working for my dad, and this lady says to me, "You're a smart girl. What are you doing in a town like this?" And I just said, "Well, I don't know what I want to do. I want to ski. That's all I want to do, is I want to ski." And she said, "Well, I'm from Colorado. Why don't you come to Colorado, go to university there and go skiing?" And so I did. At 19, I went to go skiing, but oh my gosh, it changed everything for me. Now I'm going to skip through a few slides because we've already talked about it. That's my Nutrition Academy. Oh, I am internationally accredited. I tried to get accredited here in Australia. I did brilliantly with ASQA, and then the Dietitians of Australia was the final body, the peak body, that said whether they liked what I was saying or not, and they didn't. I want you to know I'm part of a master's program out of Europe, 30% of a master's program, 600 hours, that's what this is. We have lay people who do this. We have professionals do it. I have doctors, chiropractors, lawyers, physios. I have lots of professionals that do it, but I also have lay people who do it. It's a year-long program, and we are accredited internationally. And I'm actually know that if you go to an accredited course in Australia, you'll be taught the dietary guidelines, and you'll be taught what the dietitians want you to know. So I'm over it. So I'm going to move on from here. So the fundamentals, like I said, are vitalism and anthropology. So what gives me the right to tell you about nutrition? I'm not a doctor. I'm not a professor. I'm a nutritionist, and I've been doing this for 44 years. And my love came from when I went to the University of Colorado to ski. I did pre-med, but I did 3 electives, and they were more important to me than the pre-med subjects that I did. And the first elective I did was anthropology. That put me on a course of, I want to be a nutritionist. I want to be a dietitian. So I came back to Australia, went to Deakin University, studied my Bachelor of Science, majoring in nutrition to become a dietitian, and at the end of it I went, margarine, low fat, you know, all of these foods, it made no sense to me. Ultra-processed foods. I had a professor, he'd sit on his chair with a tummy down to his knees, teaching me. I thought, I can't do that. So I went to RMIT and decided to become a chiropractor, did 2 years of human anatomy, anthropology, every ology you can, not anthropology, but histology, embryology, every ology you can think of. And then after 2 years of that, 6 years of university, I realised that I loved food. I loved nutrition. Another elective I did was astronomy. And I can tell you the constellations. I know where I am in time and space. Anywhere I hike in the world, I'm a multi-day hiker. Orion is my obsession. If I can't find Orion, I need to know where Orion is. And now I realise that when I was learning about sunspots and nebulas and things like that, I had no idea that the ions were coming to planet Earth and were helping with our quantum biology. So I figured that was all part of my learning as well. I also did the study of words, and that's how words come together in Latin and Greek and things like that. And I learnt that allopathic means all passive. I learnt that treatment means treating the mind. I learnt that diagnosis means two people who don't know. I learnt that vitalism was life. I also learnt that inspiration was to inspire, breathe into a manifest that you want in your life. And so these words started to make a lot of sense to me. But I learnt vitalism from this man here. He's 93 or 92 there. That's my father, David Lovett. And my father was a pharmacist in Lower Hutt, New Zealand in the 50s. And he noticed that one of the ladies that came in to see him in her 70s, because he only gave drugs to people who are in their 70s and 80s, he wasn't giving drugs to the young. And she came in, she was sprightly and full of life, and she had a prescription for a medication, which he fulfilled. A couple of months later, she was back for another one. A couple of months later, she was back for another one. And in a year, she was on 6 medications, and he realised they were all side effects of the first or the second or the third or whatever it was. He also ran into another one of his clients that he hadn't seen for a while. And the client said, like he said to the client, "Where have you been? Why aren't you coming in for your Pepto-Bismol?" And he said, "Oh, the quack up the road fixed me." And my dad said, "Who's the quack up the road?" He said, "It's the chiropractor." So my dad, being curious, and I think that's really important in this world. We must be curious. Curiosity gives you vulnerability, and it also gives you brave. It gives you a sense of braveness and courageousness. So he decided to go visit the chiropractor up the road. He quit pharmacy within a month, started painting houses to earn enough money to move to America, to Iowa, USA, to become a chiropractor. He learnt the difference between mechanism and vitalism. Mechanism is that we look at the body as a machine. If you've got a heart problem, who do you go to? Yep. If you have a problem with your joints, you go to Are they looking at your gut or the heart or the system or your relationships or the sunshine? They're not looking at anything else. Mechanism is important. Because if let's say I'm having a heart attack, do you think I want them to ask me about my diet? No, I want them to get my heart going again. So mechanism is important. But vitalism has been forgotten. And vitalism is an innate intelligence, that your body knows exactly what to do given the right ingredients and removing interference. And we are interfering with our bodies and we are not giving them the right ingredients. You can give the same diet to a couple, husband and wife, living in the same home, in the same environment, and those nutritional values of the food will do different things in both their bodies. It's innate. We're trying to say, no, men should eat this and women should eat this and this is what men... But we are given the right ingredients. We have the most incredible innate intelligence, and we've forgotten it. The universe has it. And yet we've forgotten that all we have to do is give it the right ingredients. And there are many. Food's one of them. Sunshine, we've always said. Movement, connection, joy, love. All of these things are really important. So I've described to you the difference between looking mechanistically in healthcare as opposed to looking vitalistically in healthcare. So they're both required, but we need to start to, make some changes in how we view our healthcare. And I'm sorry, but it's not going to change by government. It has to change within us. While I was going to the University of Colorado, my mum's Iowa. She's from Iowa. She's the oldest of 11 children. She was born in 1937. And in 1938, around 14 states of the USA, and it was the corn growing, the wheat belt, the soya, all of that, they had a plague, a moth plague. And they decided in their wisdom that arsenic and lead was a good thing to spray. And so my mother, right after she was born, arsenic and lead was sprayed for the next 2 years around her property, because my grandfather was a corn farmer. My uncle was born in 1939 after the spraying. When they went to circumcise him, he started to bleed to death. And they found that he had a disease called hemophilia. There's no hemophilia in our family. Never has been, never in any other generation there. And my mum had 10 brothers and sisters, 7 brothers, and 6 had the diagnosis of hemophilia. So while I was in America in the 80s, you can imagine what was happening. It was the beginning of the AIDS crisis, HIV. And I watched each of my uncles get sicker and sicker. But it wasn't the disease that got them sick, it was actually the treatment. And we watched, except for one uncle. So I lost 6 uncles, 2 aunts, a cousin to AIDS because of the transfusions. But what I did notice, because I was thinking and I was curious, is that each of them went on the drug AZT, because that was the drug of choice. That's what Fauci said that they needed to take, was AZT. And so I watched each of them die after going on AZT, except one. One chose to do health practices, give the body the ingredients it needed to be an innate intelligence to do the right thing. And so I watched my uncle do well until 2000. It was 2001, I think, that he passed away. And he didn't go on AZT, but there was a new drug on the market and he was asked to go into the trials. And he died a year later from liver cancer. So I watched Mechanism in full pelt, and it was so interesting when Robert Kennedy brought out his book, The Real Anthony Fauci. Has anyone read it? Yeah, remember it starts with the AIDS crisis and HIV. We lived through that. I wrote to Robert Kennedy and I told him how many people I'd lost to AIDS, and he said to me, you've got the largest family. I got an email back from him and he said, you're the largest family that I know of that had that. But I saw the use of health and nutrition and giving the body the right ingredients versus the other way. So let's look at nutrition in Mechanism and Vitalism, because I live a vitalistic practice when it comes to nutrition. Oh, and by the way, I have to tell you this. So I was asked to do an original piece, like we were to do something original. I've been saying the same thing for 44 years. It's really hard to do an original piece because if you don't have the philosophy and the understanding of how to eat and what to eat, then you're going to be swayed by so many things. I found that vitalism and anthropology became my guiding light, and it's been guiding me since the 80s. So it's hard for me to go, well, I don't know what else other philosophy to use, because I find what happens is science catches up. That's what I'm finding. All of a sudden I go, yeah, well, I knew that, But I didn't know the science behind it. But I just knew that if I lived by a guiding light, a philosophy, and I understood the historical perspective, then I knew that I could do the right thing by my body. And I stand before you at the age of 64 next month, and I've never had a medication, no antibiotics, no Panadols, no aspirin, because my father said that if you have an infection, you deal with it, unless it's a life-threatening situation. Remember, Mechanism is important. So we were brought up understanding pain and how to deal with it. If we had we had to fight for something, like an infection of some sort, he wouldn't give us antibiotics unless it was a life-threatening situation. If we had a fever, this is a pharmacist. Can you imagine this? This is a pharmacist that completely turned around, and we were able to, live our lives like this. My children are the same. My grandchildren are the same. We've lived by these principles the whole time. So I know it works. I'm not lucky. When I talk to a doctor, they go, oh, you're just lucky. What? No. This is management. This is understanding and guiding principles of what is right. So let's look at vitalistic nutrition and let's look at mechanistic nutrition. And by the way, mechanistic nutrition has a word. It's called nutritionism. It was coined by a Russian who lives in Melbourne, and he called it nutritionism. And this is how it goes. Here's a label. So on that label, you have nutrition facts. So when I was doing dietetics, I was told to always look at the nutrition facts. Look at the carbohydrates, the fats, the proteins, look at all those, and if they're perfect, it's great to eat. So if you have a look at this is a protein bar, and it's probably perfect in protein. So if anybody's unsuspecting and they've been told that this is the way they choose food, they're going to take that food in without looking at the vitalistic part of it. And the vitalistic part of it is the ingredients. So let's just look at the ingredients. We've got chocolate flavoured coating. Then there's a bracket. So fractionated palm kernel oil. What's that? How do they do that? Well, they use a hexane in order to divide the fats up in coconut oil so they get the very solid fat. So that's fractionated. If it's done naturally, it's done through heating. They're not going to spend the time doing that. It's too expensive, and these are a cheap protein bar. Next thing it is maltitol. What's that? It's an alcohol sugar. It's made by man. Next thing is a milk protein concentrate. So if it's instantized, it will have soy lecithin in it as well as canola oil. And the reason it has that in there, but it's not on here, is that that's been bought by one manufacturer and given to another manufacturer, and they don't have to put those other ingredients in there. So there's actually more ingredients than you're seeing there. Then we have cocoa. It's probably the only real thing, but it's not in its whole state because they've taken the cocoa liqueur out. Dextrose, that's a corn-based or wheat-based sugar made by man. Soy lecithin, it's emulsifier, affects the gut. Could have glyphosate in it. Could be GMO, who knows. Natural flavouring, and I'm going to show you what natural flavouring actually means. So here we are, the first ingredient has so many ingredients, and people think this is okay because they're looking at the mechanistic part of the label. What about the fake egg? So these are the ingredients of the fake egg. Compared to an egg that we get, that I had for breakfast at Cafe Musette, and I knew the quality of that egg and that butter and that cream. It was just the best meal. And yet they're saying this is bad. And they're asking us to eat this. And I just look at it and look at all the ingredients, and I've actually looked them all up and read the patents on them to find out exactly how they've made them. And it's in plastic, by the way. It's wrapped in plastic. So you'll notice, by the way, if we look back there, there's a flavouring in there, natural flavours halfway down. You'll see the natural flavours. And don't be... Like when you see rosemary extract or natural turmeric extract, or if you look at the patent on these extracts, they're quite scary how they're making these extracts. So rosemary extract is something called clean labelling, and the industry know they're doing it. So they're clean labelling things to make you think you're not really eating what you think that you are eating. So rosemary extract is another word for BHA or BHT, which causes cancer in rats, and nobody wants to eat those two antioxidants. So we eat rosemary extract instead because they've renamed it. But let's just have a look at flavouring. So this is natural or artificial. The only difference between natural and artificial is maybe the first ingredient might come from a natural source. And the first ingredient, amyl acetate, comes from pear, and it's just the smell of the pear. So this is actually strawberry, and this is in our vapes and our food. And diactyl causes popcorn disease, which is a lung disease, and it does it as in a fume, like if you breathe it in. And everyone says, well, I'm not going to breathe diactyl in if I'm eating it. Well, in actual fact you are, because as you're eating you're smelling, and it's very volatile, and it goes in through the nose and into the lungs. And when you're vaping, I just don't understand the flavours in vaping. It's diabolical what it's doing to the lungs, what it's doing to the health, especially when they're putting this in. So the only difference between artificial and natural is one ingredient. It'll come from a natural source, otherwise it'll all be chemically grown. The new the new thing that's happening is synthetic biology. And synthetic biology is where they are genetically modifying microbes in order to make our food additives. So if they want to make natural vanilla flavouring, they get a microbe, they put the gene of the smell of the vanilla in that microbe, they put it on plastic and it produces, it eats plastic, and it produces natural vanilla flavouring. And they can do this with citric acid now. They genetically modify a mould, they genetically modify viruses, and they are creating a huge industry out there where microbes that are genetically modified are changing things. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of Morgellons disease, but Morgellons disease is raging in America at the moment, and it's where people, they used to think it was a psychological issue, but it's when people start to have fibres coming out of their mouth or a cut or a hand, and it could be pink and yellow and red and orange, and the doctors would say, oh, you're just rubbing up against carpet. But in actual fact, it's the genetic modification of a microbe that has escaped, that used to make fibres or made fibres, that's getting into the microbiome of the human and causing these incredible diseases. So I've made a stance that I will never, ever purchase anything that has been produced with synthetic biology. You have to become wise. You need to become educated in order to understand, to make that stance. To make that stance that you will not do that anymore, because if you don't make that stance, they're just going to continue. Do you all know about synthetic biology? Do you realise that Australia wants to become the head? The CSIRO wants to become the head. I wrote them and I said, are you crazy? Do you know, if these things escape, we don't know what it's going to be. And you know what they said to me? They email me back and they go, oh, we only put the safe ones in the environment. The rest we keep in a closed environment. Yeah, we all know how that worked, didn't we? I write about that in my book, Lab to Table. I wrote my book, Changing Habits, Changing Lives, back in 1998. And I was seen as a charlatan, a fool, like nobody was listening back then. And now I have an amazing amount of people and collaborators. And I remember being at a dinner put on by Rod Taylor, and there was a whole bunch of medical doctors in the room and specialists, and they all went around and talked about, what they did, and they all did food and nutrition and health and circadian health and all of that. And it got to me, I was the last one, and I went, oh, I'm out of a job, aren't I? You've all got it now. And one of the doctors said to me, do you think that it's growing? And I said, well, from the 80s, yes, it's growing. Because back in the 80s, there weren't many people thinking like this. So it's wonderful to see. I just want to show you that this is, these are 3 foods. One's for dogs and 2 are for humans. And they're fake meat. And if you look at the ingredients, they're all identical. There's nothing much different. But you can pick the dog food because it's got cobalt in it. They wouldn't give that to humans and copper. So that's C. And if you look in the middle, you'll see Lego hemoglobin, like middle way down, you'll see soya Lego hemoglobin. So that's a genetically modified microbe that has been inserted with the root of a soybean gene that holds the heme, which makes the fake meat bloody and red. They're masters, you've got to admit. They're masters, but they're making you think that food is food, looks like food, tastes like food, smells like food, but isn't food. This is natural green colouring. There's nothing natural about that. It's completely mechanistic. And the fact it's got propylene glycol, which is a PEG, polysorbate 80, and I just look at it, it's for sweet food, that's the sorbitol in it, and alpha tocopherol. There are 8 derivatives of vitamin E, tocopherols and tocotrienols, and we need them all for health. But everybody thinks, oh, alpha tocopherol's the best. It's not. In actual fact, Dr. Barry Tan is showing that taking just alpha tocopherol can increase your chances of different cancers. He's been working on it for years. What about Apeel? What are they doing in Australia? Fasan snuck through Apeel without telling anybody about 18 months, 2 years ago. Apeel is something that they spray on the fruit or vegetable just before it's picked, and then after it's picked, they spray on a diglyceride and a trans fats and things like that, and it preserves your fruits and vegetables. It is not labelled. In America, it has to be labelled. In Australia, they're not labelling it. You won't know that you're consuming this. So this is why we buy decentralized. We ask our local farmer, do you put Apeel on here? I bought a juice to ferment. I'm always fermenting things, and I bought a juice to ferment, and it said after 5 days, put it in the fridge after you've opened it, and after 5 days, throw it out. So I had it on the bench in the middle of summer. I put my ferments in it, and I taste, and I'm tasting it, and I'm going, 5 days later, it's still sweet. There's no fermentation. Nothing has happened to it. So I ring them and I go, have you put a preservative in here and not told me? And they went, no, we don't put preservative in there. They'd been buying food that had been laced with Apeel, which is a preservative, but they didn't know. So these are things that we need to know and understand. Are you all stunned, or are you just cold, or you're a very quiet mob? Sometimes I hear gasps. Oh, really? They're doing that? So anthropology, I had the most incredible professor. And by the way, I chose those subjects on lecturers. I didn't choose them because I was interested in them. I'd been told these lecturers were incredible. And Van Gerven was the name of my lecturer. And I was I was a 19-year-old. He was probably in his 20s. And I was starry-eyed about his information. And I would often go up to him after class and ask him more questions about anthropology and cultural anthropology. And I got to say that there was a man that came into my life that changed the course of what I wanted to do and where I'm going, and it hasn't changed. I have stayed with the understanding of anthropological principles, both in food, in culture, and in everything that I do. And I'd like to explain these to you so that you understand the things that maybe you should be looking at and how you should be eating. So we were hunter-gatherers, we were herders, and we were agriculturalists, and then now we're the chemical farmers. But there has been a slow evolution of how we have eaten food. So seasons dictated our eating. So in the summer, we might have sweet fruits and really fat animals that had saturated fat in it. And I remember sitting with the professor who created my course. We sat together for a year creating the functional nutrition course. And he heard me on a phone call saying something about saturated fat. And he says, Cyndi, you know saturated fat causes insulin resistance. I went, right? Saturated fat causes insulin resistance? Well, there's got to be an evolutionary reason. That's what I said to him. And he went off and came back and he said, oh my gosh, there are thousands of peer-reviewed, articles talking about the evolution and why saturated fat was caused insulin resistance. So insulin resistance is not a disease unless it's chronic. It's something that was a survival mechanism for us. So when food was plentiful and there was lots of fat and sweet fruits, we would make triglycerides, store them into our fat cells to what? Survive famine or winter, which happened on a cyclical basis. So we gain weight, lose weight, gain weight, lose weight, and on around about a 5 kilo amount. That's what they believe. So in the summer, we would put on weight that would help us through the winter months. And then in the winter, unsaturated fats were available to us and lean meats. And what would happen is that if there was no food available, we would use around women 220 grams of fat a day, a day. And for men, it was 330. It's a bugger. When they fast, they lose 330 a day and we lose 220 on average. And it would also, if there was a volcano eruption and we had heavy metals or we had some toxin that we'd come along, the fat cells would store that if they were fat soluble, and then they would release it. So we would have an ebb and flow of putting on weight, losing weight, gaining toxins, losing toxins. But we live in a place now where we are on 365 days a year, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We can get food from anywhere in the world. And so we've lost that beautiful ebb and flow of having those sweet fruits in the summer and then in the winter not having them as much. So I have a farm now. I know exactly what grows in my area. I eat seasonally. I eat the fruit on my farm. I eat the vegetables that grow on my farm. I have the meat that grows on my farm, the eggs that I have on my farm. And yes, I'm lucky. And any foods that I don't have, I go to my local farmer's market and I purchase what I know he is a local farmer, Good Harvest on the sunny coast. He's a local farmer and I know that what I'm not producing, he's producing locally. It's not hard. It's actually really easy. It's just when we're in a centralized food system, it creates a real problem. Location also dictated our eating. Think about deserts. I went to Namibia. I was very fortunate to go to Namibia for a month, and I was driving along an old, well, there was no water in it, riverbed, and we came across the Himbas. And the Himbas are a group of people that are herders, and they also will gather if there's any food in Namibia, but the water isn't always flowing there. But they basically are herders as well as hunters. And they live on meat and dairy. And when you have a look at the pictures that I took, you look across and you just wonder how the goats even survive. There's no greenery there whatsoever. And yet, you know what? These kids and the parents looked incredible. Their teeth were perfect. I also went to the Himbas on the bitumen, and I call them on the bitumen because anybody can get to them. And they expect you to bring food for them. And the local store sells GMO corn and vegetable oils for you to, and Maggi noodle chicken, whatever it was. And so you were expected to take that food to them. The kids were sick, they were snotty. I could see the difference between them living on their traditional diet, but they don't eat many plants. So their diet is dictated by where they live. What about high altitudes? What about the Kagias of Premier, who still exist today? They herd yak, and they live on dairy that's been fermented and old yak. And they will travel 5 days and pick up grain and eat grain. But it takes them 5 days, it's fermented, it's well prepared, everything is done properly. So these is in high altitude, they're mainly herders. What about near the equator? So if we look at the Dani and the Lani of Papua New Guinea, they are 90% carbohydrates. They have some, well, I think they've got a type of kangaroo there, they've got rats, they've got, or rodents, I should say. And they do live on that, but mostly they live on what's in the environment, which is lots of carbohydrates. And we can also look at the Catawbas that live on the island near Papua New Guinea. And the Catawbas live on fish, coconuts, and fruits and vegetables. So a lot along the equator, they eat plant-based foods as opposed to meat-based foods. So it all depends where you live on the planet. So latitude, longitude, and altitude dictated our diet. Where we live on the planet, the sun also has its way of looking at our body. And we have an innate intelligence that knows where we are in space and time, latitude, longitude, and altitude. And so your body knows when it's getting the food and the water that's around locally. But preparation was also important. If we look at the Australian Aboriginal people and we look at, if we go to the Cooper River, there's a plant called nardoo. And I actually have a nardoo grinding stone. I was given it. I don't know how many thousands of years old it is, but they would get the nardoo, it's a seed, and they would grind it, soak it overnight, wash it, and cook it. Do you know who died of nardoo poisoning? Burke and Wills. They were on the Cooper River. There was lots of water, there was lots of animals, they had guns, they were able to eat, but they saw the Aboriginal people eating nardoo or collecting nardoo. So they figured that was their vitamin C or their scurvy food. So they started to pick it, and Wills was left with a whole bunch of nardoo. He, of course, died. They died. They were so weak because nardoo has a toxin in it that stops the utilisation and the absorption of vitamin B. So I don't know if you've read the book about it, but it wasn't through lack of water and food. It was through nardoo poisoning because Australian Aboriginal people knew exactly how to prepare the food. We've lost our culture and tradition here as white people, as well as every other tradition out there. Because we eat bread that has risen in 1 hour. I wrote I created the documentary, What's with Wheat. If you ever get a chance to watch it, it is still very current today. Because back then in 2015 and 2016, when I was recording it and doing it, I was just starting to learn about glyphosate. And now glyphosate has become the big word, everybody realising what it's doing to our microbiome. So I have a takeaway here for you if it helps you, and it's called QPSL. Q is for quality, P is that you prepare the food properly, S is that you eat it seasonally, and L is that you buy it locally or where it's grown locally. It's a good thing to remember. So our cultural lifestyles, we've got sunshine, moon and stars. We've always been fascinated by them. If you've ever watched Graham Hancock's documentary that is called, Ancient Apocalypse. If you've watched that Ancient Apocalypse, you'll realise that many of the great structures of the world were all based around the stars and where they were on planet Earth. It's well worth watching. And it's on Netflix, by the way. And circadian health is so important. Grounding, sleep, connection, movement, leisure, joy. These are all important. Laugh. I get up every morning at 4:30. Like last night was hell for me. I never eat that late and I'm never in bed that late. But I did have wonderful conversation which kept me awake, which was wonderful. But I'm in bed very early because at night I kind of go, well, you can't have lights on. Yeah, and if you put a television screen on, you're being directed with that. So my husband and I have changed our whole lifestyle around and we get up around 4:30, maybe a little bit later in the winter. I get on my bike. It's freezing. It's 2 degrees on the sunny coast at the moment. In the morning. I go down, I meet a couple of friends, we have coffee, we laugh, I then go swimming, and by the way, our water's 20 degrees. Might be 2 degrees on the outside, but it's 20 degrees in, it's very easy to get in. I swim 1 kilometre, I usually run about 3 kilometres on the beach barefoot, and then I get back on my bike and I ride home. And I figured that's a great start to the day. And if we all begin to, and I watch the sunrise every morning, that I watch that sunrise. And more often than not, in the winter, we've got beautiful sunny skies. So I've done a collection of things that my ancestors would have done. And that's what it's all about. It's about doing a collection of things that your ancestors would have done. So I've given you a snippet of what I know about the food industry. I've been investigating them for 44 years, and this is about what the food industry is, from the dairy to wheat to salt to sugar to everything that they've done to our food is in that book, and it's been updated. I could update it again because the Apeel is not in there because that happened only in the last 18 months. And I can't believe how it sneakily came in. Anyone hear? Oh, by the way, we're going to be doing, it was terrible. So I think choose your food wisely. Local farmers markets, direct from farmer, ethical, and from regenerative farmers. Remember, we can't change the world, but we can change ourselves. And while you might want to change everybody else around you, just work on yourself and you will be surprised that through your influence, you will be able to make some changes for them as well. It's quite incredible what happens. So I just want to show you how, to finish up, I just want to show you how the vitalistic principles and the anthropological principles answers the next couple of questions that I'm going to go through. Should I be vegan, omnivore or carnivore? Well, it really depends where you live. There's no culture in the world, by the way, that was vegan. There was vegetarianism, but they were on the equator. There was no vegetarians in Norway. They eat reindeer, and in the summer they eat lots of berries. But it was only on the equator that they were able to be more plant-based. So where you live in space and time and what foods grow. So I am quite happy eating fruit. I know the carnivores in the room might go, ooh, but it really also depends on what you do as a profession. If you're a doctor that does shift work and lives under those lights, I'd be changing either your profession or the way you're eating, or how you do things. I have a friend who's a medical doctor and very alternative, and he only does consultations outside. And we can do that in Queensland. Should I do long fast, be in ketosis, or intermittent fast? Remember I told you about the cycles? Foods were less, foods were more. This gives you an answer as to what we could be doing. It gives you that sense of guidance and all the questioning out there. What should I be doing? For me, it creates a sense of guidance. Is cholesterol, carbohydrates, salt and saturated fat bad for me? We've been eating saturated fat forever. We've been not hydrogenated vegetable oil, which is a saturated fat. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about natural saturated fats. Cholesterol is in breast milk. Cholesterol is needed for all our hormones. Cholesterol is needed for vitamin D. Cholesterol is needed for so many things. It's just ludicrous that they put this thing on cholesterol. Carbohydrates, depends where you live. What's local? What's regeneratively grown? Salt, there's been salt roads forever. Salary came from the word salt. You were paid in salt. That's how valuable it is, and yet they crucified salt. How much water should I drink a day? Well, your body makes water. It depends where you live. Depends what foods you're eating as to how much water. It's not 3 litres a day for everybody. We are individuals. Should I supplement my diet? And if so, with what? Well, did our ancestors have vitamin A by itself? Or I've watched the darlings of supplements come and go. I've watched vitamin C was the beginning in 40 years ago, and then it was vitamin A, and then that was toxic, better get rid of that. And then it was vitamin D, and then it was I just watched the darlings come and go. I know how they're made. I know that most of them are being made with synthetic biology. I'm not prepared to do that. I will eat liver if I need copper and B12 and vitamin A. I will eat liver as opposed to trying to go out and find myself a supplement. I was listening to Peter Attia and Huberman the other day, and they were listening to them talking about the supplements they're taking, and because they're very mechanistic and they're very scientific, and they want, and they think they're doing the right thing, but in 10 years they'll go, oh, maybe that wasn't the right thing to take. What is the healthiest fat oil to eat? Well, we never had vegetable oils, did we? So these are questions that can be answered when you start to have a really good vitalistic perspective on food and a historical look at what your body requires. Thank you, everyone.